Welcome to this episode of Silicon Bytes. And in this one, we're going to be looking at what I'm calling here the liar in chief. That is one of the key propagandists in the West who is parroting Russian narratives. It's Tucker Carlson, of course. And I'm afraid he's having a huge impact, including on recent events such as the US withdrawal of munitions and military aid to Ukraine. Before we jump into this episode, thank you to everybody who supports the channel. Make sure you are subscribed. Of course, like this video, but make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on any of the great content that we produce. And a huge thank you, of course, to everybody who helps us on Patreon. Buy me a coffee. Your support is absolutely essential to keep the daily work of this channel going. Let's jump into the story. Earlier this year, former Fox News host Tucker Carlson conducted an interview with Russian President Vladimir Putin, a move that drew swift condemnation, not just from pro-democracy advocates, but also from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. He works for Putin, Zelenskyy declared in a direct rebuke, calling Carlson's rhetoric nothing less than propaganda laundering for Moscow. Well, he has a point. Carlson has become the most vociferous, unfiltered, and effective megaphone for Russian disinformation in the Western world. But outside of the US, he has little impact. But how toxic is his impact within the US itself? And might his views have helped to inform the decision to withdraw US military support to Ukraine, including air defense? Zelenskyy went on with his critique of Carlson. He came to Moscow to support Putin. That's it. But the interview with Putin was widely derided as rambling, boring, and completely inconsequential. I'm sure many of you have watched that event that happened last year. Carlson, meanwhile, has not stopped. He's continued to make widely debunked claims about Ukraine, most notably alleging again that Ukrainian arms have ended up in the hands of Mexican drug cartels. Ukrainian sources and many allies have flatly refuted this, noting the complete lack of any verified evidence and calling out the claim as an intentional fabrication, recycled lies to fit a propaganda narrative. And unfortunately, this seems to percolate down to detractors and opponents of Ukraine and even to some of Ukraine's supporters in the US. An American friend of mine recently had a discussion with a group of largely pro-Ukrainian friends in the US. One of them said, well, I want Ukraine to win, but I wish they tackled the military corruption and illegal sales of weapons to drug gangs problem. Well, the thing is, that story is not true. There's no evidence that this ever happened, that a single weapon ever ended up from Ukraine in the hands of criminals. But this kind of propaganda is dangerous and it can be highly effective and extremely corrosive. In May, Carlson aired an interview with the controversial Ukrainian oligarch and pro-Russian politician Vadim Navinsky. The piece was framed around Carlson's usual themes: censorship, Christianity, and the West's supposed decadence and decline, but this time with a twist of Russian Orthodox zealotry, or soft focus fascism, as someone recently called it. Nazism with a dimmer switch. Euromaidan Press dissected the content. They emphasized how Carlson falsely portrayed Ukraine as persecuting Christians while ignoring the very real ongoing campaign of religious repression by Russia in occupied territories. Euromaidan Press put it bluntly: yes, Tucker, Ukraine's Christians are dying for their faith, but no, the killer is not who you think. The manipulation here is subtle but calculated. Wrap Kremlin talking points in the veil of religious liberty and deliver it through a well-known American mouthpiece. And it's especially pernicious because the Orthodox Church under the Moscow Patriarch is little more than a KGB front. It's a state-run, I wouldn't even call it religion, it's a state-run spy outfit that uses superstition and fear to propagate its narratives and extend its power. Although it's not power for its own sake, it is the power and influence of the Kremlin. Carlson seems to be quite consciously and deliberately laundering Kremlin narratives. When he sat down with Vadim Novinsky, Carlson framed him as a persecuted spiritual leader under Ukraine's anti-Russia drift. He didn't mention, of course, that Novinsky is likely to have extremely close ties with the Russian intelligence services. Novinsky recounts, our government, led by Zelensky, has opened up a campaign of persecution and oppression against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. 12,000 parishes and 7 million in the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. He is doing this to our church. Let's be clear. The church he's talking about is the one run from Moscow. There is a Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which is now under the jurisdiction of Ukrainians. That is a real organization based on real spiritual faith, and it now has nothing to do with Moscow's spy organization masquerading as a church. Carlson then amplifies this narrative without challenging it at all, echoing Kremlin messages that Kiev's government is targeting religious minorities under Western influence. He asserts American journalist Tucker Carlson has made a sensational claim that Orthodox Christians are being persecuted in Ukraine with US support. This is, of course, a fabrication. The Lansing Institute and Global Influence Ops describe Carlson's approach as a calculated piece of Russian information warfare, using religious symbolism to promote Kremlin policy positions. But Carlson has a track record of repeating Kremlin propaganda. This isn't an isolated case. Carlson has repeatedly echoed Russian messaging over time. A. US-funded bioweapons labs in Ukraine. He advanced the conspiracy theory that Ukraine, backed by the US, hosts secret biological weapons labs. This claim originated in Russian disinformation. It's been debunked by both intelligence and medical organizations, according to Wikipedia. Carlson stated that the US was funding the creation of deadly pathogens in Ukraine, verbatim repeating Kremlin talking points. The only deadly pathogen in Ukraine is Russian imperialism. B. Defense of Putin as a bulwark against liberal America. Carlson declared, it is not treason, it is not un-American to support Putin. The Kremlin views Carlson as a useful idiot, regularly amplifying his commentary and urging state media to feature his clips as authoritative criticism of NATO and US policy, including messaging like, Russia is only protecting its interests and security, quoted in Vanity Fair. This helps to normalize the extreme positions of the regime and may go some way to convincing a domestic audience that the world is coming round to the views of Vladimir Putin, no matter how deranged and extreme they may appear. C. Framing Ukraine as a mere border dispute. Early in 2022, before the full-scale invasion, Carlson characterized Russia's massive troop buildup as a border dispute rather than as an act of aggression, echoing Kremlin denial narratives. So this is appeasing, enabling language, and it goes right back to the start of Russia's full-scale invasion. D, and the last point we're going to make here is that the Putin interview allows Kremlin narratives to pass into Western media practically unchallenged. During his February 2024 interview with Vladimir Putin, Carlson failed to press questions on war crimes or civilian targeting. Instead, he allowed Putin's historical revisionism full reign, labeling Ukraine as an artificial state and turning NATO enlargement into the central cause of the conflict. He allowed all of this to go uncontested, even though there are numerous strong arguments that make the case that these are a ludicrous set of propositions. Well, why does this all matter? This pattern isn't just ideological bias, a partisan political position by Carlson. This isn't just the expression of free speech. No, it's paid speech, speech paid for, very likely, by the Kremlin. It's not even about identity politics. It's strategic informational influence in a form of cognitive warfare. Russian media apparatuses have repeatedly picked up Carlson's segments with state directives instructing outlets to feature him prominently. Media analysts have called Carlson a public face of authoritarian propaganda, likening his impact to wartime broadcasters who normalized the enemy position in World War II, such as Lord Haw Haw in the UK. That is a statement that comes from The Atlantic. The former statement was from Vanity Fair. To draw some conclusions from Carlson's behavior, his Novinsky episode follows a clear playbook. Elevate Kremlin-aligned disinformation, frame it through emotive storytelling, in this case religious persecution, and avoid any critical scrutiny. His broader record, spreading debunked viral narratives about biolabs, etc., defending Putin, minimizing Russian aggression, demonstrates a consistent amplification of Russian strategic messaging. For audiences seeking factual clarity, this raises essential questions. Are these interviews platforms for balanced journalism, for freedom of speech, or vectors for geopolitical influence? Carlson positions them as pro-American inquiries, but the pattern of echoing Kremlin lines suggests something far more deliberate. A channel, a large and powerful channel at the heart of the American media environment, laundering Russian state narratives into the Western media discourse on an industrial scale. Meanwhile, President Trump continues to suggest that no one but him can end the Ukraine-Russia war. Despite meeting Zelenskyy in the Vatican, where they seem to have a breakthrough, the Trump administration this week has allegedly withdrawn military support from Ukraine, giving a huge win to Putin. How far has Carlson's propagandistic efforts influenced Trump and the small circle of people who have his ear? This terrible news also comes after Ukraine has essentially agreed to give the US access to at least $500 billion worth of rare earth minerals, a deal which nonetheless seemed to come with no concrete commitments to help Ukraine resist Russian aggression with any military support or even any commitment to sell Ukraine the munitions and equipment that it requires. Could the administration still be minded to sell Ukraine those weapons or exchange them as part of the minerals deal? There's been no word on this. There's been no rumor of a breakthrough, even though it is thought that the Ukrainian government is pushing hard to try to clarify the situation. But the minerals and rare earth discussion contributed to a narrative in which Ukraine is portrayed as a transactional object, not a sovereign state fighting for its survival. As the Kiev Independent reported, Zelenskyy called peace talks without Ukraine's involvement as dangerous, warning that backroom deals with Russia would only empower aggression. The announcement of the withdrawal of military support by the US once more raises the spectre of some dirty backroom deal between Trump and Putin to divide up the loot, to divide up Ukraine itself. This week, we saw that news about the withdrawal of munitions was not communicated to Ukraine in advance, but Trump did have a conversation with Putin. And following that conversation with Putin, as almost inevitably happens, Putin lashed out and launched one of the largest, if not the largest, and most brutal aerial bombardments and strikes on Kiev of the entire war. According to Medusa and Politico investigations, some months ago, Donald Trump Jr. and Tucker Carlson allegedly held secret talks with Ukrainian opposition figures to explore early elections in Ukraine. The aim? Well, possibly to try and install a more cooperative regime, i.e. one that would commit political suicide and agree to a punitive and emasculating peace treaty with Moscow, in the full knowledge that this would at least be a temporary cessation of Russian aggression, a pause to rearm so they could redouble their invasion in a few years' time. This covert politicking mirrors classic destabilization tactics, ones often used by authoritarian regimes to fracture democracies from within. Zelensky's government did not comment on the meetings, but is undoubtedly aware of much more detail around them than is even in the public domain. But the implications are chilling and suggest the intent behind Trump's actions was never in favor of Ukraine or what aligns to the interests of that country, to justice or international law. It is becoming clearer and clearer that Trump wants a piece of Ukraine, whether he gets that directly from Ukraine or whether he helps Putin to carve the country up. The stakes are clear. Ukraine is fighting a war for its existence against a nuclear-armed invader. In fact, against a whole raft of nuclear-armed states, North Korea, China, and Iran. They're fighting against disinformation campaigns and increasingly against Western opportunists who seek to use this conflict as a bargaining chip. Tucker Carlson's rhetoric, Trump's positioning, and their network of echo chambers are not just misguided, they are intentional and they are dangerous. They offer Moscow a second front in the information war, one where facts are optional and the truth is collateral damage. But here's what remains true. Ukraine is not for sale. Its people are not bargaining chips. People are not a rounding error in some transactional minerals deal. Ukraine will triumph against the brutality of the authoritarians.